Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. I'm Lewis Gray, Senior Marketing Manager here at DSMN8. Today, I wanted to talk about executives on LinkedIn and specifically why it matters, why so many leadership teams still hesitate, and most importantly, what you can actually do to get your C suite posting without it feeling like a chore. You might well be wondering if execs really need to show up on LinkedIn, and hopefully, after listening to this episode, you'll realize that the short answer is yes, absolutely, because we've got stats, we've got strategies, and even a little security savvy to make it easy. Plus, as always, I'll point you towards some disseminate resources that can help you take action. So, without further ado, let's jump in. So let's start then with the obvious question, why bother? Why do executives need to be visible on LinkedIn? And firstly, it's a trust thing. So people trust people far more than they trust logos. And when these people are leaders, so think CEOs, CMOs, and VPs, it makes a huge difference. In fact, studies show that people are more likely to buy from and even want to work for companies where executives are active online. And if we're being completely honest, when a CEO posts, people just notice. Even with a smaller following, they often generate as much engagement as the company page does. Organic reach for company pages feels virtually non-existent right now, and messages from business leaders feel authentic and operationally transparent. It's a human voice as opposed to a polished corporate statement coming from the company page. It isn't just external though, employees take notice of this too. So when leaders show up on LinkedIn, it signals that social media matters. And funnily enough, when executives get involved, employees tend to follow their lead. They're more likely to share, more likely to post, and suddenly advocacy feels like part of the culture rather than just a marketing initiative. We've seen it time and again, and there is nothing more impactful for scaling employee advocacy than getting your senior leaders involved. You could even go one step further and get the leadership team rather involved in your rollout comms, which is something that General Motors did exceptionally well. So when they launched their employee advocacy program, their invites were sent by the president of General Motors. Needless to say, those emails were opened and people took action. I'll drop a link to the General Motors case study in the show notes because it's just a great example of the impact that your executives can have on an employee advocacy program. Another example of this, though, came from Heather Wheater, who is a senior brand and social media manager at SalesLoft. She joined us recently on the podcast to discuss the program they launched with DSMN8 and had this to say about how executives help build momentum.
So I think getting your executive buy-in from day one is crucial. And so to speak to that, every time that we invited when we invited our product team to the platform, our product leader either ahead of that invite was like, hey, this is coming to you. This is why this is important. This is what I'm asking you to do. This is your level of involvement and engagement. So I think by leading with not only the value of what's in it for them, but then having the executive support from the top down saying, hey, this is important. You should be a part of it. Like having that combination of two is really kind of what got everything, the momentum going. And so we found it to be really important that way.
Now, if you're listening to this and thinking, that's all well and good, but my executives just won't do it, you're not alone. The three most common blockers I hear are lack of time, uncertainty about what to post, and then lastly, the executives just don't see the value. Time and uncertainty are probably the most obvious ones. Execs will just say, I don't have time for LinkedIn, or I'm not sure what I should post. And totally fair. The calendars are full, and the idea of sitting down to think about and ultimately draft a LinkedIn post probably, isn't going to be top of their priority list. The trick is to remove the friction and give them clarity on what's expected. Are they writing posts themselves? Are they just reviewing drafts? How often do you want them to post? Just getting agreement on those basics is half the battle. But the last blocker is the most important one to address. And that is that they don't always see the value. And it's where a lot of conversations with executives fall flat because we talk to the executives about our goals and not theirs. We say it will get more impressions or it will drive more engagement. But if we're being completely honest, most senior leaders don't care about engagement rates. What they do care about is business growth, attracting the best talent, building shareholder confidence, and strengthening company culture. So when you're pitching executive advocacy, frame it through that lens. Show them how their presence on LinkedIn supports recruitment, how it helps sales teams open doors, and how it humanizes the brand for investors. And the other half is just showing them what's in it for them. This isn't just about company branding, it's just as much about their own reputation as leaders, attracting top talent, and even building stronger relationships with clients. When they see it through that lens, it starts to feel less like extra work and more like actual career value. Now, I do want to take a moment here to acknowledge another blocker, and that is the security risk that can come with all of this. Because unfortunately, the most common way executive social media presence is achieved is by handing over LinkedIn credentials, which is, of course, a huge red flag and a legal and InfoSec nightmare if anything goes wrong. I will come back to this later, though, because there's a safe and effective solution I wanted to discuss. Before we talk about solutions for getting your executives active on social media, something that I did really want to talk about is the byproduct of this. And it's basically just how it impacts your wider employee advocacy efforts. And that's just what we refer to as the ripple effect. Because the moment that your senior leaders start posting, you see it spread through the company. Employees recognize that if the CEO is posting, then maybe they can too. And maybe they can even interact with your CEO in a way that they wouldn't be able to offline. So, maybe dropping a like or commenting on one of their posts and having an interaction that otherwise might feel a bit out of reach for them. But before you know it, you've then got more people sharing stories, more visibility, and more impact. There's also the recruitment angle as well. So candidates will, of course, check LinkedIn before they apply for a role. And if they see that your leadership team is visible, approachable, and talking about the future of the business, it's a huge differentiator for your company. The opposite is also true. So if leadership is silent, it can send the wrong message. People assume that they either don't buy into digital or, maybe worse, they just don't have anything to say. But neither, as I'm sure you'll agree, inspires much confidence when applying for a role. Somebody else that we spoke to about executive social media presence was Adobe's Andy Lambert. And here's a really interesting take from him about the ripple effect that this all creates.
Like, I don't think employee advocacy really works until we've got exec level buy-in from this, where we've got a CEO doing it or someone on the C-suite going like, this is the way forward. It starts there, then that kind of trust radiates out from inside the business to your evangelical customers, to like creators and communities, podcasts, newsletters and influencers, and then your kind of Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester reports. It's like you see how those circles like expand on each other like a ripple that goes through the industry. And that is, quite frankly, how B2B brands grow.
Okay, so arguably the most important part of this conversation is how do you get your executives posting on LinkedIn and how do you actually make it stick? So one simple approach is to build frameworks for your execs. Think of it as a content playbook. So what theme should they cover? What's their tone of voice? How often should they show up? Giving them a framework makes it much less daunting for them than staring at a blank screen. And we put together a great guide on this recently that I'll share in the show notes because it clearly outlines this whole process. Another approach, though, is to make it collaborative. So you could pair execs with somebody in the marketing or comms team who can draft content for them. You can then add their personal touch, so maybe a sentence or an anecdote, and suddenly it feels authentic without eating up too much of their day. You'll be surprised how much execs have to say when you present them with a post that they're not 100% happy with. And I don't mean this in a bad way at all. It can actually be a great way for them to get thinking and adding their expertise and unique tone of voice without asking them to write the post from scratch. Also, if security or compliance is a concern, especially for larger organizations, maybe those in regulated industries as well, you're definitely going to want to think about delegation. So not the old school, here's my password kind of way, but proper secure delegation where content can be drafted, scheduled, and approved without compromising access. And that's where the right tools make all the difference because you can keep everything secure and auditable while still making life easier for busy executives. Of course, if you've listened to this podcast before, you'll have heard me say this. We endeavor to keep this platform agnostic, but frankly, I wouldn't be much of a marketer if I didn't take a moment here to tell you about our executive influencer tool, which was basically built to remove all of these blockers. So one of the features is you have something called delegate access, and this means that your comms team, your marketing team, or even a trusted assistant can draft posts, schedule them, and keep everything moving without ever needing the executive's LinkedIn password. The exec still has the final say, but the heavy lifting is taken care of, and your InfoSec and legal teams can sleep peacefully, knowing there's no chance of an employee going rogue. You've also got ROI-based analytics because, as I said earlier, execs don't tend to care about vanity metrics. They care about business outcomes. So instead of just seeing likes and comments, you can actually show them the impact and the value that their visibility creates for the business. But that's it. I'll leave more information about this in the show notes so that you can explore this in your own time. Okay, so let's pull all of this together. Getting executives active on LinkedIn isn't about turning them into influencers overnight. It's about visibility, it's about trust and culture. It's about showing your clients, employees, and candidates that your leadership team is engaged and forward thinking. And the way you make it happen is by removing blockers, giving them structure, and providing the right level of support. Because when you do, the ripple effect across the business is absolutely game changing. If this is something that you're exploring right now, of course, I've already mentioned the executive influencer tool, but if you're not quite ready for that, we've got heaps of resources at DSMN8 that can help. I definitely recommend checking out our CEO content framework piece if you do want a step-by-step guide to building a leader's personal brand. And of course, you might have heard this on the podcast before, our employee advocacy benchmark report is always worth a look for the bigger picture. I'll link to all of these in the show notes below. But that's it from me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you did find this episode useful, do share it with a colleague or just drop us a quick review, because I know podcasters say it all the time, but it really does help. Thank you very much, and we'll catch you next time.